Good evening, everyone. We continue our study in the book of Isaiah, and today we are in chapter 38. Now, one of the things I wanted to highlight is that chapter 37 doesn't flow into chapter 38. They happen to be in the same theme, but something happened between 37 and 38. And so all of these things needs to be understood that it is not the next day or the next hour or the next week. So in chapter 37 yesterday when we were reading, we were given the understanding that God has told Hezekiah that this shall be a sign to you, that you shall eat this year and the second year and also in the third year, and there will be plenty in the vineyard, and you will eat the fruit of them. Now, all of this is to indicate that Hezekiah is not going to die. Hezekiah and the people in Jerusalem are not going to fail. But it is a very difficult situation, and we are told that that was the prophecy that was to assure Hezekiah. Now, obviously, you would see that all this, and then in verse 36, and then the angel of the Lord came and did all these things. Now, what is important for us to realize is sometime in between, and things happened. And the things that happened is recorded in chapter 38 today. And chapter 38 tells us that in those days, Hezekiah was sick and near death. You could say that he is critically ill. So all the promises of you will eat of this year, the next year, and the third year, that went out the window. And so a lot of things happened in between, and something triggered that made Hezekiah sick and is almost dying. And in accordance to the Jewish tradition, in those days would be approximately 3 days before Sennacherib. So I'm just letting you know how the Jewish commentators understand this from their tradition. So I'm just trying to fill in the blanks. You don't have to say that, oh, it's not in the text, because we don't know exactly those days, but the oral tradition tells us that it's 3 days to Passover, and Hezekiah was found sick near death, and he went to the temple. And then we see this peculiar incident. And then, and this is the meaning, and then Isaiah, the prophet, the son of Amoz, went to Hezekiah and said to him, thus says the Lord. Now, all the time I have mentioned to you, whenever you read things like this, it is to ensure that the audience who is listening will pay attention, and it's for Hezekiah to pay attention. This is what God is saying to Hezekiah through the son of Amoz, and this is a direct conversation with Hezekiah. And the message to Hezekiah is this: set your house in order, for you shall die and not live. Now, this appears to be a very severe situation. And we are told, again, I'm just filling in the blanks through oral tradition so that you can have a glimpse of how the Jews would understand this passage. That Hezekiah had sinned, and that's why he is to die. He is sick near death, and we are told in, I think in verse 21, this sickness, let me just put it at the side, chapter 38, verse 21, that he has a boil. And this boil is toxic, and this boil is causing him to be near death. Now, again, such boils are plentiful in the Hebrew scripture. You read about Job being inflicted with boils. Now, one of the interesting things that we can actually, I guess, we can actually glean is the fact that there is always a book of, how should we say, a book of medicine. Maybe you could say that. Uh, the I guess the idea here is that in those days there is such a thing called a book of remedies. As you can tell, in the old days, you don't find people like Hezekiah, people like Job, or any of the individuals in the uh, books that list them whenever they are inflicted of any illness, that they don't seem to reach out to God and ask for healing. That is a very unique phenomena. And so in this case, even when Hezekiah was sick near death, it was not a a, 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 a practice that they would call to God for healing. Because the book of remedies that they have uh, allows them to be able to cure practically most of the illnesses that exist within their midst. It's, where do we get the book of remedies? I don't know. But it appears that in every culture and civilization, there are really smart people, even with the Bedouins, with the Indian culture, with the Chinese culture, with the all the primitive cultures. There are people who are able to understand the herbs and the grasses to be able to provide medicine to cure whatever they have encountered. And it's within that environment that they are very knowledgeable. But in this case, Hezekiah has no ability now to get himself cured. And so, just like Job, you would find that none of them actually prays to God for healing. And so now Isaiah the prophet says, you are going to die. You are not going to live. Now, this type of phrase, if you go back and say you compare to Ezekiel chapter 18, you find that dying and living has an extended meaning. Dying would mean that you would die in this life, and in this life will be that the life you have will end as you know it, and he will not continue to live, and that is an A and a B. And that is not a good sign, because in Ezekiel 18 tells the Israelites that if they repent, they will live. And so I would urge you to go back and read Ezekiel chapter 18, and you'll find it all across the chapter. And so there is a concept of living beyond this life. But in chapter 38, it appears that whatever Hezekiah had done, that he became sick and he was almost going to die. And God says, well, that's it. Better get your house in order. And why get his house in order is because he won't be around for too long, and somebody needs to take care of the kingdom. That is what it means by set your house in order. Now, a little bit of the background from Jewish uh, oral tradition. Uh, One was commenting that Hezekiah had decided not to get married and not to have children for fear that his child would betray God and would not be faithful to God. However, in the eyes of God, the obedience to be fruitful and multiply should not have any condition as to what may happen to the child. And so David's children, not all of them are good. The children of Solomon, not all of them are good, but they had many children. But it appears that Hezekiah had none. Now, we read in the Bible that Hezekiah's child would be Manasseh, and he became a very bad king. And according to uh, Jewish traditions, that it was Manasseh who killed Isaiah. Now, that was the condition that Hezekiah had, that he was sick and he was going to die. And it appears that that might have been his sin, so to speak. Now, I'm going to leave that aside and I'm not going to talk too much about it because it's not in the text, right? It's not in the text. However, one thing that we are sure of in the way that God has given life to people, everyone has a measure of time to live naturally, unless it is terminated earlier, either by sickness, by accident, killed in combat, in war, but otherwise, in a normal, natural course of life, the life can actually perpetuate long. Now, in today's environment, we have medicine to enable a person to live long, and so did they. But in those days when the medicine didn't work, that was it. And so if they had gone to war, it would be even shorter. If there was a murder, that would be even shorter still. Now, there is another instance where God strikes a person dead because of specific sins, like the sons of Aaron who had burned strange fire in the tabernacle, Nadav and Avihu. So that happened, and so their lives were cut short. Otherwise, if there was no sickness, no punishment, no death in combat or war, no accidental death, no intentional murder, a life would live its normal course. That would be what we are told. Now that Hezekiah is to die, his life is prematurely cut. We carry on into verse 2. After this incident, when Isaiah tells him, well, that's it. You just need to deal with your impending death. The reason why it is critical is that there is no cure. The book of remedies did not have a cure for him. And so Hezekiah turned his face toward the wall of the temple, right? Of the temple. He is at the temple. And then he prayed to God. So this is, and then he entreated specifically Jehovah God. Now, this idea of turning to the wall has led the Jews to see that praying to God, like at the Western Wall, at any wall, allows them to concentrate on their prayer. That this is by turning his face away from Isaiah. Otherwise, it would be like praying to Isaiah. So Hezekiah turned his face away from Isaiah, who spoke to him, and he faced the wall of the temple, and then he started to pray to God. And this gives that kind of a pattern where Jews today pray to God at the Western Wall, at a wall, right? And this is what Hezekiah said. So, and then after he looked towards the wall, and then he says, remember now, O Lord, I pray. Remember, bring to mind, don't forget. Don't forget what? Don't forget how I have walked before you in truth and with a loyal heart and have done what is good in your sight. So remember, there are three things. One, have walked before you in truth and with a loyal heart and have done what is good in your sight. The idea of walk is conduct life. He has lived before God. Now, this idea of before God is to your face. And so he is walking in front of God, and God can see what he has done in his life. He has done it faithfully. And he has done it with a whole heart. So perhaps you could say that faithfully and a whole heart is really an A and a B. But the idea here is to show that Hezekiah is telling God, you know, God, remember what I have done. I have served you and led the nation with a whole heart. I am a complete king to the people. I have done, not thought, right? These are the things performed. And he said, what is good, Tov? What is functional in your eyes? And so everything good or evil is always viewed in God's eyes. In this case, God is asked by Hezekiah, you can see what I have done for the nation, for the protection of the people. What is good? So I have led the people well. I have done what is needed to be a good king. And then, and then, so now we can say, this is the thing. And then Hezekiah wept bitterly. Now, the idea of bitterly, the word here is greatly, which means it's very intense, and cried a lot, cried very loudly. Is that he is not willing to give up everything just yet. So he is seeking God for his mercy. Now, understand, everybody has a fixed time to live, unless it is artificially adjusted, right? Adjusted by sickness, by disease, by somebody intentionally killing, by accidental killing, and die in war or suicide. But the idea here is there is a time for Hezekiah. And so now, apparently, and then, this is and then, this doesn't mean that after Hezekiah prayed and everything suddenly came in play. According to Jewish traditions, Isaiah was walking out now in the courtyard of the temple. And the word of the Lord came to Isaiah saying, go and tell Hezekiah, thus says the Lord. Again, listen to what God has to say. The God of David, your father. Tell Hezekiah, I have heard your prayer. I have seen your tears. And surely I will add to your days 15 years. Now, this is the intent. And for King Hezekiah to get 15 years, right? To get 15 years of his life. Now, the explanation would be this. The 15 years is this. That he otherwise would have, and that he would not die, and he will live to his normal end of life. And his normal end of life is another 15 years down the road. That would be what it means by add to your days 15 years by removing his near death or critical illness, which is a boil in verse 21. Now, is this some form of a untreatable illness that appears in the form of a boil? I don't know, but it does appear that his critical illness would be removed from him, because God says, I have heard, I have seen, and I will add. Three things: 1, 2, and 3. And so this idea here is God is giving and responding to Hezekiah. Next, I will deliver you and this city from the hand of the king of Assyria. And by this, you can now see that in those days is not that Sennacherib has not yet attacked Jerusalem just yet. I will defend this city. Now, this is as much as I can say, and that is what God has given as a message to Hezekiah. Go and tell Hezekiah. Now, this is still to Isaiah. Isaiah hasn't gone to tell Hezekiah. Now, somewhere here in between verse 6 and 7, something has happened. So Isaiah would have gone to Hezekiah and said all these things to Hezekiah. And we actually read now a little disjoint in our chapter today. And so I want to bring you from verse 6 to the end of this chapter to verse 21. And in verse 21, this word noun is and then. Isaiah would have spoken the words that God gave him to Hezekiah. And in addition, Isaiah also said this: let them take a lump of figs. And this word, a lump of figs, is actually a cake. This would be dried figs that is pressed together and apply it as a poultice on the boil, and he shall recover. And this means that he is to rub on it. You can say that it is to rub on it or apply as a plaster. But whatever it is, using that, he will recover, not die, and shall live. And so the next verse continues, and then Hezekiah said. This means that he has not applied the figs yet. It is an instruction to go do that. Then Hezekiah says this: what is the sign that I shall go up to the house of the Lord? Now understand, when you read verses like this, what is the sign? This is something visible that can be seen. And go up to the house of the Lord means he will not die And then he needs to he wants to see what is that sign. So typically all these Jewish people is looking for God to show a sign. So we've seen that throughout the Hebrew Bible. And so the question is, what sign are we talking about? Now we go back to verse 7, right here. The conversation continues in verse 7. It says, and this is the sign to you from the Lord, something visible, that the Lord will do this. Jehovah will do this thing that he has spoken right above. Now, the reason why I went back down to verse 21 and come back up to verse 7 is to let you know that that would be an order of how things are. But the way it's written was written at the back. And so, in case you may not be able to follow the conversation, I just went ahead and then came back to verse 7. And this is what God has spoken. Behold, I will bring the shadow on the sundial, which has gone down with the sun on the sundial of Achatz, which means that this sundial was built by Achatz. Now, this is not 10 degrees. This word is 10 steps. That would be a better way of saying that. 10 steps backwards. And so the sun returned 10 steps backwards on the dial, which had gone down. So again, I just put here 10 steps. Now, what miracle is this? The miracle is done this way. This is a sundial. It is a pole. And the sundial will have notches on the ground. The notches on the ground will give us a indication of the hour, right? Of the hour by the sun. And so what we find is each notch or each step is an hour. So we're talking about 10 hours back. Now, the miracle is about the shadow. Now, we are not told how it is done, but all we can say is the shadow has moved, right? The shadow moved. How did the shadow move? Was it because of the sundial? Was the sundial moved as a whole? How did the sun turn back? All of these things. Well, you can't say the sun moved back, but somehow it had an effect. And so this is the effect that you can see. And what we are not told was whether Hezekiah actually saw the shadow moved or shifted by 10 steps. But we are able to assume that actually happened because verse 9 tells us that after all this that was said, this is the writing of Hezekiah, king of Judah, when he had been sick and had recovered from his sickness. Now, we are told that this happened, and we are not told when it happened. So, when did it happen? We're not told. But we are told that he recovered, right? He recovered. And it is likely after Sennacherib. After Sennacherib. Now, this was the day right up to verse 7 would be the day when Sennacherib would have attacked Jerusalem. And that night, Sennacherib had lost his 185,000 soldiers. And verse 9 would be sometime after that event. And Hezekiah had applied the figs or the cake of figs onto his boil, and somehow he recovered. How long it took to recover, we don't know. But we did know that he had recovered. Now, this word recovered means that he came alive from the sickness. And so that would be the picture we get in verse 9. After he had recovered from his sickness, after he came alive again, I guess you can say that, right? Came alive again. Now, again, I wanted to point out to you that he would have a natural life, but he had his illness. This period of time is 15 years. And so he is able to live back his life and not get it cut short by 15 years. And so Hezekiah now pens a song, right? Pens a song. So we begin reading verse 10. In this song, he depicts his story. Hezekiah said, right? In the prime of my life, I shall go to the gates of Sheol. I am deprived of the remainder of my years. And this is about his illness, or better still, critical illness, that he is about to die. These are all poetic language, that he still have many years to live in the prime of his life, deprived of the remainder of my years, which is 15 years. He is supposed to go to Sheol. Verse 11, I said, I shall not see, and this is God's name, I shall not see God. And this is, in verse 11, the God, and by the way, this name, Yah, is Yod He. It's an abbreviation of Yod He Vav He. Usually we find this pronunciation Yah in the Psalms. And so this is a song that he was writing, that I will not see Yah, the Yah in the land of the living. I shall observe man no more among the inhabitants of the world. And so again, this is about the fact that he is about to die. My lifespan is gone. Now, this word lifespan, this really means my dwelling was removed, or my generation was removed. The picture here is generation, right? My generation, or another word, my dwelling, my tent, is removed. So, taken from me like a shepherd's tent. Now, this idea, taken from me, I guess you can say that this is to be uncovered, to be removed, right? Taken from me, to be removed, like a shepherd's tent, where he's moving away. I have cut off my life like a weaver. So my life is cut off, or I cut off my life like a weaver, like cutting a thread to the weaving. And then God cuts me off from the loom. So this is about a picture of weaving. But once you cut off the thread, well, that is, he's no longer part of the garment that is being, the cloth is being woven. Then he says, from day until night, you make an end of me. So the idea here is, this is about my life being life shortened. It's all very poetic. That you make to put an end to my life. Right? You cut me off from the loom from day until night. You make an end of me, and this is about death. Verse 13. I have considered until morning like a lion. So he breaks all my bones from day until night. You make an end of me. So this is another repeat to talk about the fact that he was going to die. He's waiting like a lion, but it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. There's going to be an end. Like a crane or a swallow, so I chattered, I mourned like a dove. My eyes fail looking upwards. O Lord, I'm oppressed, undertake for me. Now, this idea of verse 14 is this: like a crane, like a swallow, so I chattered, and I mourned like a dove. My eyes were lifted on high, O Lord, rob me, pledge yourself to me. Now, this word here, oppress, in verse 14, uh, really is about an abuse that it implies that the life cut short, right? Life cut short. And so, God, undertake for me, pledge yourself, guarantee me that I won't die. What shall I say? He has both spoken to me, and he himself has done it, that I shall walk carefully all my years in the bitterness of my soul. And so the idea here is, God says in verse 15, what am I supposed to do? That he has both spoken to me and he has fulfilled it. That I will cause, let's say, cause my sleep to flee in the bitterness of my soul. And this is about a promise to not die. O Lord, by these I live. Right? In verse 16, it says, O Lord, concerning these people, they will live, and in all these things is a life of my spirit. So you cured me and let me live again. And so it is important to understand that God holds life in his hands, and in this more of a poetic way of saying, God restored his life. Indeed, it was for my peace. I had great bitterness, but you have lovingly delivered my soul from the pit of corruption, my soul from destruction, and you have cast all my sins behind your back. And so from here, we can say that when God restored his life, there is a forgiveness. And that's why there is a restoration. For Sheol cannot thank you, death cannot praise you, Those who go down to the pit cannot hope for your truth. Why? Because Hezekiah is not yet going there. The living man, he shall praise you as I do this day. The Father shall make known your truth to the children. And so he is going to marry and have children and will tell about what God has done. Verse 20 now is our last verse because we have covered 20 and 20, 21, 22 after verse 6. And so in verse 20, we says, Jehovah, this is a song of Hezekiah, remember? Jehovah, save me. And he promised to save me. He will save me. He said he would. And this idea of save me is to deliver me. And also the same word, in this case, deliver from sickness or critical illness. Therefore, we will sing my songs with stringed instruments. Now, this idea of stringed instruments is to play the song, or to, but the word used is to play music, right? To play music or sing songs with the instruments. It says all the days of our life in the house of the Lord. All of this, I guess you can say that this sounds very much like Psalms 23, verse 6, the last part. And I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever, all the days of, for the rest of my days. And I shall return to the house of the Lord for the rest of the days of my life. So this is a poetic way of saying, I will stay with God. I will be with God. I will walk before him. I will be with God, basically. And so he is very, he has great gratitude to express to God the fact that he is not dying and that he has seen the sign. And then Sennacherib was destroyed and the figs were applied and he didn't die. And now he pens this song, and all I can say as we come to a close in chapter 38 is that Hezekiah has seen the hand of God upon his life, that he will continue to walk before God faithful, wholeheartedly, and to keep doing good all the days of his life. That's the picture that's been painted in the song, right? In the song. And so with this, we come to the end of our session today.